Welcome back to Nutrition Connection, the show where science meets storytelling. I'm your host, Dr. Kristen Hicks-Roof, dietitian, researcher, and lifelong advocate of the role of nutrition, health, and wellness. Each episode, I sit down with dietitians and nutrition experts all across the food and healthcare landscape, leaders whose work touches nearly every aspect of our lives. So, whether you're a student, a seasoned professional, or someone simply curious about the role of food, nutrition, and health, this podcast is just for you. The views, thoughts, and comments on this podcast do not reflect those of my employer nor the employers of my guests. So let's go ahead and get connected. All right, today I'm really excited to bring on Cara Harbstreet. She's the Director of Nutrition for Oatley North America. Welcome to the show, Cara.
Hi, thanks so much for having me on.
So we've crossed paths. We've been at several different conferences together over the years, and even actually in my National Pork Board photo reserves, there's pictures of you on pig farms from I think 10 years ago. So somehow you've been connected with me, whether I was here or not.
Yeah, I mean, that's the funny thing. Being in this career as long as I have, you start to realize the circle of dietitians really is not all that big.
Oh yeah, I used to tell my students that all the time. I'm like, even though there's over 100,000 dietitians, everyone kind of knows everyone through one piece or another. So don't burn bridges. That's your first tip for the day. So, Kara, talk to us. What inspired you to make you want to become a nutrition professional?
Yeah, so if we go back even further than 10 years when I was out on farm tours, I grew up in a really rural area. So that connection through agriculture was always kind of lingering in the background, whether I realized it or not. And I was also an athlete. So all through college, back to high school, just from like really early days being active in sports and then continuing to stay active afterwards. I think the sports nutrition connection, like so many dietitians, was my first introduction to that connection between food and performance and recovery and how you feel. And so, while in hindsight, it would have been great to have all the knowledge I now have when I was still actively competing, that really made me understand how important it is to properly fuel yourself. I went through my own struggles with body image and disordered eating patterns and a lot of the other same struggles that drives people towards the field. But I recall a couple of classes as I was bouncing around trying to figure out my major and what I might do for a career. And I remember the first one I took that made me really realize like, oh wow, this interest in food, this interest in nutrition and health could actually be a viable career path. Actually was a world food and agriculture course. And so you bring in that connection to culture and global cuisines and just again being really deeply interested in food and everything to do with it. Finally committed to a major, went through the internship, and the rest is history. So here I am now.
Well, and that's really interesting. So I got into nutrition on sports too. You're right. There's so many people that like we've had some sort of personal experience that kind of veered us into it. But I also think that certain classes touch people in different ways. And so I'm curious, like your interest in kind of like global cuisine, and we're going to get into some of your interest in sustainability in a minute, is like, do you think that there was something driving that interest of global cuisine? Is it your family that brought that, or what do you think kind of inspired that?
Yeah, I think that was maybe the first exposure I had to any sort of food or ag connection outside of what I had literally seen like in my own backyard. So, born and raised in the Midwest, it was a lot of corn, it was a lot of soybeans. And I remember that class exposing us to stories from farmers and ranchers and other folks involved in the food system. And it really did just quite literally open my eyes to realize that the food bubble and like the world I had been living in was actually quite small. So it took a while for that to really come full circle in the work I was doing because I spent time in, clinical settings and did a lot of corporate wellness and private practice. But that interest was always there. And I think it honestly is because at the end of the day, like I love to eat. And I know a lot of dietitians will relate to this, but it's also like, in addition to that interest in food and the science and the way that it can make us feel, it's also like if you enjoy cooking, if you like trying new things, if you enjoy spending time in the kitchen or around a great meal, I think that's the driver that again, in this course, it really emphasized that this isn't unique to those of us living in the States. I mean, this is a worldwide thing. Like anybody, anywhere can connect over a great meal. And that sounds so corny, but like at the end of the day, I think that interest in food really is what, connects everything.
Well, and you're right in the sense of a meal, well, it's just nutrients, right? Like we might think of it as nutrients. There's so much beyond just nutrients. It's connection, it's flavor, it's enjoyment, it's happiness, telling stories, right? And like that's where agriculture really bridges into dietetics and how we talk about the foods that are grown by the producers and the farmers and the ranchers. So you've had quite a journey and you alluded to it a little bit. Talk about your journey into what kind of career paths have you already had, and then all the way to where you are today now at Oatley?
Yeah, I mean, now that I'm a decade plus into this career, I've accumulated a few different experiences along the way. But I was graduating in that era where I think maybe this has changed by now, but it was still very much that you were expected to go into clinical and kind of pay your dues. That was the expectation that you put in your 4 or 5 years before you veer off into private practice or before you pivot to do something else. And I think I was pretty fortunate. I ended up landing my first full time job as a dietitian straight out of grad school in the corporate wellness world. And this was great for me because, again, it just exposed me to so many different things that I had never uh, done outside of just what we had been doing in our internship. So, health fairs and health screenings and getting out and really engaging with the community. It was nice to not be in a hospital setting, but after just a couple of years, through a series of events, ended up leaving that position and actually going into clinical to focus on type 1 diabetes in a pediatric setting. So working with kiddos who had just been diagnosed. And that was a great experience to, again, just really recognize the limits of what food could do. We needed a lot of support from the medical team, from social work, from the communities that these kids and their families were living in, and also emphasize just how important and critical nutrition is. And so seeing kids go from undiagnosed, critically ill to thriving at school and at home once we got insulin on board with a great management plan. And I love that position, but it wasn't really the most fulfilled I thought I could be. Through another series of events, ended up going into private practice. And that's where things really started to fall into place as far as seeing both what I was good at and what I enjoyed doing, and also what could sustain a career. So I've always been really candid and open about the fact that those positions that I described a moment ago, as nice as they were to have the benefits of a full time job, the salaries unfortunately just didn't support the lifestyle that I aspired to have for myself. And so moving into private practice was great. That eventually morphed into more media work and nutrition communications beyond just the one-on-one nutrition counseling. But that brings me to what you mentioned earlier, with some great opportunities to get out of the office or out of the clinic, so to speak, and actually interface with some of the farmers and ranchers that are growing the food that we all eat, and really seeing that story of food on the other side of the plate before it ever gets to us.
Well, and I mean, it's tricky. I think a lot of people are scared of change. And I mean, even going from corporate to clinical, right? Like, do I remember everything from my intro nutrition training to go into that? But how did you make that decision beyond financially to go into private practice? Like, what spurred that to be able to really take a full nosedive into private practice?
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's such a weighing of the pros and cons, and you're never going to, at least I don't think you're ever going to land on this clean cut answer of like, this is the right move. Like, I think there's maybe hesitation involved at any step. But in addition to the finances, I mean, I've always been someone who loves to work hard, just is able to focus on something that really interests me. And I want to see that project through from start to finish. And for me, a lot of it was the reasoning in my own brain of, well, if I'm going to work this hard and put in this much effort, why wouldn't I be the beneficiary on the other side? Again, I described those trade offs. You give up
Yeah.
PTO, the benefits. I mean, in full disclosure, too, at the time, we were a two-income household. So I had the benefit of a supportive partner at the time who made that more possible than it would have been if I was truly going into it on my own. And so if you find yourself in a similar boat, anyone who's listening, I think that's something that you just have to really audit and like honestly give yourself feedback on. Like, what am I comfortable trading off and what do I gain for it? And for me, it was the fulfillment and the satisfaction and just knowing that at the end of the day, even if it felt like I'd never really progressed further, at least that hard work that I put in was building towards something that was for me.
One, I think your reoccurring message of you really do have to be hardworking. Like you cannot just expect brands to reach out to you and can't expect like all these opportunities just to be at your front door, right? Like you started in the private practice and then slowly we're getting into media, right? Like it's you're building, but you have to work and put in the time and energy and resources to ultimately be successful in practice.
Yeah,
So
yeah, the
how
time is a huge factor.
Oh, yeah, there's so I don't think people realize, like, even starting this podcast, I mean, it is time, right? Like, I have my workday, and then I'm also doing this outside of my workday, but it's something I'm passionate about. I get that fulfillment, which is what you were talking about. Like, I love advancing our field, and I love being part of that, and that's kind of where this comes in. So how did you then you've made some big changes, which change is very stressful for a lot of people to do. So you left private practice where you had a really successful media. I mean, you had a following and a building and all those things. So how did you make that decision to then move into where you're at Oatley? And then what do you do at Oatley?
Yeah, well, this is kind of a long and winding story. I'll try to give you the shortened version, but a couple years ago, I started thinking, if I'm going to continue working and evolving my career, I think in addition to being hardworking, it really also helps to have this like constant curiosity. Like I love learning new things, and the field of nutrition really does let you do that. And I started seeing the writing on the wall that just social media was changing so much. The media world and nutrition communications was changing, and I wanted to specialize into something a little more focused. At the time, I was more of a generalist. I was being tapped for projects in a lot of different areas and working with a lot of different clients, and I loved that. But it did feel like I was more generalizing with my nutrition skills and really focusing. So I did make the decision to go back to school. I am almost at the tail end of another master's degree in sustainable food systems. And so the plan was really to go back to school, develop this new skill set, deepen my knowledge for agriculture, food systems, sustainability in every sense of the word, and then apply that either to continuing in the communications and media work that I was doing or make a complete pivot and just kind of see like what else is out there for me. And I was extremely fortunate and happened to be more or less at the right place at the right time to see the job opening at Oatley as I was finishing the first couple of semesters in that program. And so it was one of those things where I thought, jobs like this don't really come around very often. I'm going to have to go for it. As I was reading the description, I mean, it was one of those times where you feel like it kind of sounds like they're describing a unicorn, but the unicorn might be me. Like it just seemed like a perfect blend of, you know, interest in taste and flavor, the sustainability components, and then of course nutrition is one of their core pillars. And I had always appreciated that about them just from my own personal experience with the products before. So, long story short, I threw my name in the hat, went through a series of interviews, and they extended the offer. And so now my role as director of nutrition at Oatley is to cover the North American market, which is US and Canada. And that's been a great way to really again just focus my knowledge obviously through the lens of oat milk. Like we are a plant-based oat drink, but we have a full portfolio of products, and so it's a nice way to get a my fingers in the world of the CPG space, so consumer packaged goods, and talking about a health promoting, great tasting, versatile, convenient product. And at the same time, really hone some of the business skills and understanding the inner workings of like, what does it take to grow oats, put them through this process, turn it into oat milk, package it, sell it, get it out there. And so my role, I would say, is about half and half. I'm doing a lot of internal support for our sales teams and our sustainability teams and everyone else who's been there in a more established role, but then also still working with the same network that I had before and a lot of the overlap with kind of the nutrition comms work that I was doing prior to.
When I love how you talked about you're like, "Is this a unicorn job? Like, am I that unicorn?" I literally felt that same way when I was reading the job description at the National Pork Board. I'm like, "I love doing that. I love doing that. I love doing that." And I'm like, "Oh my god, I wasn't even planning on changing careers." Like, I had a very successful academic career, and I was like, this is perfect. I'm gonna throw my name in that and see what happens. So I do think sometimes I know I get questions from people like, "How did you get that job?" And sometimes it's like, I applied. You know what I mean? Like I don't know if it was meant for me, but I loved what was proposed in the job description. And so I think that is really cool. So you know, when you think of CPG goods and when you're in industry, dietitians are so cross-functional, right? Like you said, you're working with sustainability, you're working with marketing. So how does scientific data and evidence impact what you do on a day to day, especially in those cross-functional teams?
Well, you mentioned day to day, and that's absolutely it. Not a day goes by that we're not, you know, combing through citations or, reading a brief that tries to distill everything that just got published. I mean, that is the core value that Oatley's carried through from the beginning. Back in the early 90s when they were first founded, that really drove the innovation around developing a great tasting oat milk for people who either could not or didn't want to drink dairy. And so science, thankfully, that's not a big hurdle I had to cross to get people on board. That is like just built into the structure of Oatly. But for us specifically, in the nutrition side, I'm a team of one. And so I'm really the one that people come to when they have a question. Like they're hearing conversations out in the media space, or it comes up in a meeting or another conversation. And so I'm here to, I think, both be one, the voice of reason and kind of let them know, like, hey, here's what the science is saying about this topic right now. Here's what we know. Here's what we don't know. But then I think also it's really important to translate that, like put the context around it of what would this mean for you as you're talking to XYZ type of person out in the real world. I try to say, come to me with your textbook questions, but you should be able to leave not sounding like you're reading from a textbook. Like at the end of the day, the best way to translate that nutrition science is to make it a conversation and put the context around it that lets someone know, okay, I feel like I have enough information to make the food choice or the decision that's right for me. And so science is where we start, but that's just the starting point of, again, putting it into practical terms so people can actually use the science to advance whatever their goals might be.
Well, I think you probably face similar challenges with people who work in these cross-functional teams, especially when you think about regulatory and claims and advertising and marketing, right? Like being the subject matter expert, again, no matter what product you're at or where in the food industry or even commodities that you're sitting in, you may be a small team. And so it's how do you distill this really complex science into this soundbite? And I think that's a skill that you continue to practice. Like,
Oh,
that's not something that, like, you're walking out of undergrad or grad school or PhD, whatever programs you're leaving, and you're like, "I know how to do this." I mean, it took me, 10 years, and it sounds like it took you about 10 years too, really, to, like, build that muscle to be able to do that. So
well,
what
and I think also, just to add, I think also saying it confidently, because you mentioned being in these teams where not everyone has advanced degrees in nutrition or like years of experience with nutrition counseling. Like I would just offer the advice that you as the nutrition expert, as that subject matter expert, are truly the voice of authority. Even if you're not sure, it's perfectly okay to say, hey, I need to check a reference real quick, or let me make sure this is the most up to date info I can share with you. And just have the confidence in knowing not only what you can speak to as the expert, but also building that trust to just remind people, hey, I don't know everything. Nutrition science is constantly changing. We're always learning more. And I'm going to make sure that I get good information into your hands.
when a lot of times, like, I'll even reach out to a friend, like, "Hey, is this kind of how you're interpreting, whatever this new paper is?" Sometimes I'll do that because I want to make sure that, yeah, you're right. I'm giving the most up to date, credible information, which is constantly changing. And that's what a lot of times I tell my team, and, even when I was a faculty, like, things are always changing. They're not black and white. They're constantly in this gray zone. And so we can say with confidence what we know today, which may be different when new papers come out. So,
Exactly.
what would you say is your favorite or something you're most proud of in your career so far?
Well, I think just that resilience to change, we've talked so much about that in this conversation. I mean, I definitely feel proud of finding a place where all of my interests are kind of like swirling together in this perfect storm. And it does feel really great to wake up and feel confident in the career and have consciously landed here. I also just feel proud of the fact that, again, like being that voice of reason. I think that's something that's carried through from my really early days on social media is just honing that ability to keep it conversational enough and quell some of the fears that build up. You know, there's so many clients I've worked with that have felt so incredibly anxious around food and after working together have been able to say, yeah, like grocery shopping doesn't take me 3 hours anymore, or, you know, my kids are happy with the meals that I'm making for them now. Like, those are the little moments that don't always get broadcast in, like, a big headline. And there have been moments like that as well, but, I mean, I do miss aspects of the nutrition counseling piece because you can just tell immediately where your work is making a major impact, and that always feels really good.
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of differences when you think if you're kind of on the back end and you're not directly patient facing or client facing, that you may have higher level impact in the sense of like it's more public health. So you don't get that like one-on-one win versus when you are, maybe in private practice or in clinical or in community where you're like directly working with community, you kind of get those tangible wins more frequently. I think sometimes that like it's not as easy to grasp when you're like, oh, I did a media release, and you don't see those direct impacts from people who read that media release, right? And so I think the successes and things we're proud of may change depending on where you're at in your career and what you're doing in your career. So, what suggestions or tips do you have for someone to have a career like you? And I also want you to touch, which we haven't got too deep, like your master's in sustainability. Like, what made you want to do that? And what tips would you have for someone who may be interested in that sustainability angle?
Well, I think the sustainability focus is, at this point, anyways, almost whatever you want it to be. It's not that sustainability hasn't been a thing. I mean, it literally has been since humans first started stewarding the land thousands of generations ago. So, I mean, it's definitely not new, but it is new in the sense that, you know, people are curious about it. They care about it and they're really aligning it with their other values. And that determines how they eat, how they shop, how they live, how they dress, where they live, you know, the different aspects of our lifestyle. So for dietitians, if these are things that are popping up in your personal life and you kind of adopt some of these um, changes or new habits, or you pivot aspects of your lifestyle, that might be a signal that, hey, like this is an interest area that could inform the work that I do in the nutrition or health world. Even things as small as, you know, focusing on food waste. I mean, that's a great way to make an impact at the personal level that trickles up through public health and then eventually hits planetary health. And so I think, again, like that constant curiosity is such a great skill to develop as a dietitian. And I think in the field of nutrition, you know, there's so many different angles that you could approach it. But for me, you know, I made the decision to really formally pursue that in the sense of going back for another degree. And I definitely don't want to imply that that is the correct or right way to do it for everyone. And so again, if this is an interest area, I think there's a lot of great resources out there. I think another really important skill that I've picked up over the years and would absolutely recommend with no hesitation is to get outside the bubble of dietetics. I think, you know, you'll hear, oh, networking, like that's a great skill. Like, you know, get out of your introverted, you know, default mode and go out and talk to people. And yes, I do think that's part of it, said as someone who is more introverted. But I think specifically targeting some of these communities outside of the nutrition world is a great way to just expose yourself to, I think, new or different ways of thinking, or maybe shed some light on the areas that you haven't focused on. And you just never know. Like those connections don't need to be and probably should not be transactional. as in, I expect to get something out of this, or eventually, if I help you, you turn around and help me. I think it really is just subverting that expectation that we're networking for the sense of an expectation and just really pursuing either an interest area or being part of a community or supporting the work that other folks are already doing. So I think that's advice that I would extend regardless of what specialty you're working in is like see what else is going on outside of that specialty.
Yeah, I love that idea. And I remember when I was a faculty member, I went to a conference for physical therapists. And here I am sitting like the lone dietitian. I mean, I was a researcher and I worked with physical therapists quite often in my research, but it was so eye-opening to see like what were their challenges? How were they trying to overcome obstacles with patient care? And I actually developed a whole research agenda based on a concept that I got stimulated with at this conference. So I do think that there is so much that we can learn not only from other health disciplines, but even like this year, I'm going to go to Expo West. Will be the first time that I'll go to something like that because I want to see like what are food products, how are they talking about nutrition? How are they marketing nutrition? What claims are they saying? Because I think we can learn outside of just our niche of dietetics. We can learn so much from all these other disciplines, whether it is marketing or sustainability or products or other healthcare disciplines.
Yeah, and I mean, I heard you mention earlier, like the whole passion behind this podcast is supporting the dietetics field, and I'm similar to you in that I love being a dietitian. I love supporting dietitians, and a lot of that also means we have to advocate for ourselves. Like until we make an introduction to these other professions or industries outside of healthcare, the likelihood that anybody encounters a dietitian in their real life is actually pretty low. And so again, like not that we all have to wear this hat and like go be the ambassador for the entire field, but the twofold benefit is that one, if they remember that conversation or they connect you to work that they're doing, there's that association there. They understand the role that dietitians can play and, I don't have to rely on this for revenue or income anymore now that I'm not independent, but they'll think of you first. Like if they have a project that has a nutrition need or they remember like, hey, she's great in front of the camera or she could develop a recipe and help us with this project. That also can open doors that again, if you're looking to diversify where your revenue comes from or the types of work you do, that could be another great benefit.
What I think you brought up a good point that like you may not reap the benefit right away, right? You might just be planting seeds because you're right. Down the road, they may say, "Oh, I have this project. Oh, I remember I met this dietitian at X and Y conference." And so I think there is such power of not only building your network, but actually like showing like, here's what I can do and not being so pushy in terms of like, I can do this for you right now. Because not everyone, especially across industries who've never even thought about nutrition, right? Like food brands that are out there who are like, I don't even know how I would bring a dietitian on my team. Like, what would you even do? Oh, well, I can tell you, I can, start off as a contract and do a little project here or there. And then all of a sudden it builds. So I think there's so much power, you're right, to just like have a seat at the table. But the only way we can have a seat at the table is making the introduction. So, if you had a crystal ball, what do you think is coming next in nutrition? And there is a lot of things coming. So far, I've heard on this podcast, but what do you think is next?
Oh, there is definitely, yeah, no clarity in my crystal ball, that's for sure. But I will say, I mean, just based on the work that I do here at Oatley, what we're bracing for is, fingers crossed, a big surge of interest in fiber. We have seen this already with protein, and I know that you are definitely no stranger to that. But we're already seeing some new product innovation and a lot of emerging research about extending what we already know about the benefits of fiber. So when we pair fiber with protein or we're including fiber at each eating occasion, there's a lot of different ways that I think this fiber conversation is going to change. And it feels like this year really is the time for that to take off like it hasn't before. I mean, we've seen it in some ways. There was the big surge of interest in gut health, and now we're understanding more about like that gut brain connection. But I think, again, because of where I sit at this intersection of sustainability, even like soil health and how that influences the nutrition of food. When we merge that with something as broad and general as fiber, I think that's that first foothold of again, like these topics are starting to swirl around each other and eventually it's going to just like take off. And I'm again hoping that this year is the year we see that happen.
I feel like I have been seeing fiber everywhere. I don't know if it's this like fiber maxing trend that was going on TikTok for a little bit, but you're right. I do see like fiber almost in this crystal ball, but like you're right. I don't really have much clarity like what's going to happen in the fiber space, but I think it's so interesting because even research has changed so much in the past few decades. When we were looking at isolated nutrients, and then we were starting to look at individual foods, and now we're looking at dietary patterns and how foods impact one another, right? And so, like, even when I think of a product like Oatley, where you're not only bringing in fiber, but you have so many other nutrients that are all encompassing in that package, like, how does that food as a whole, as a nutrient whole, then impact the gut microbiome and, all these other cardiovascular endpoints and things like that? So, I like this. I think there's a lot coming. We'll see. Maybe at the end of the 2026 episodes, maybe we'll have celebrated that there is something that we're finally getting people to eat more fiber, which I know many dietitians have
You'll have
championed.
to do like a recap at the end of the year, go back to each one of these predictions and see which ones panned out.
That's such a good idea. Okay, stay tuned. End of 2026. So thank you so much, Cara, for your insight and your knowledge. And hopefully, if you're listening, you enjoyed hearing about her career and lots of little advices for feedback and tips on how you can be successful in your career. And don't be afraid of change, because there is a lot of opportunity on the other side, and you can always pivot if you're not happy. So if you like the episode, make sure you follow, leave a review, but most importantly, check out the next episode, because every episode I bring on dietitians and nutrition experts all across the spaces. So thanks again, Cara.
Thank you so much.